So it was evident today that in looking through some of your folders that the process of reading an article, annotating it, making notes and analysing what's there isn't happening as perhaps as much as it should. So what I thought I would do is a bit of a screencast to demonstrate how I would approach reading through an article that you find related to the magazine industry. What I've done is I've copy and pasted the text from an article that I found earlier today. It's the one that I was sharing with you in lesson from The Economist. Non-news is good news. What I've done just for this process, and this is something that I might write on the article, so I might print the article out and do this by hand, but you could do it this way if you wanted, those of you that like to work on your computer. I've recorded the source, which is The Economist. The article came from their website, but it did say at the bottom of the article that it was originally printed in their print edition. So I'm happy with that, and I know that The Economist is a reasonably reputable source. It is part of the magazine industry itself, so I have to keep that in the back of my mind while I am reading and analysing what's being said here. But it's a well-written text. It's quite a serious text. The quality of language within articles in The Economist is quite high, and it focuses on very serious and important topics. The article was originally published in June of last year. So it is a little bit old, but it still is fairly recent, and so can be used in relation to this topic, looking at the current state of the magazine industry. And I've also noted that I accessed the article today on the 16th of April in 2013. I'm going to start, and I would start right at the beginning and treat this, pretty much as a typical piece of analysis. In that, I'm going to look at the title, the subtitle, and I'm going to analyze and think about what's there. So the main heading for the article was "Non-news is good news." Well, that implies to me that perhaps it's a quiet period at the moment in terms of the magazine industry, and that there's been no major or significant stories to suggest that the magazine industry is in trouble, which is what is often heard, particularly over the last few years, or that actually things are getting that much better. Okay, so that's what the implication is for me of that first opening line. However, the next line, which I'm just going to highlight here, and I'm going to try and add a comment to, is kind of interesting because it almost, to some extent, contradicts the tone of that initial heading. So it says the threat of the internet has forced magazines to get smarter. Now, rather than being non-news, that actually sounds quite positive. So it implies to me that actually what's happened is that the magazine industry is starting to respond far more positively to the World Wide Web. And, the reason that I think it sounds positive is because of the phrase "get smarter" at the end. So this sounds quite positive, and it suggests that the industry is perhaps not in as much trouble as we might think. We being us, the audience. Okay? So there I've made an annotation. I've picked out what is an interesting piece of the text. It made an interesting point. I've just made a note about it. I'm trying to link, in my note, I'm trying to link it back to my knowledge that I have of the topic already. So now I'm going to carry on reading. So it opens with a quote, "Print is dead." Interestingly, it doesn't say where that quote has come from. Now that could be the case that print is dead is quite a common expression. So for me as a teacher, having studied this topic for some time, print is dead is quite a common phrase. But in terms of the interest of the article, it would have been useful to know where that quotation has actually come from. The costly print advertisements that kept magazines and newspapers alive were migrating to the web, where they earned only pennies on the dollar. To publishers it felt as if a hurricane was flattening their business. So we can see, I'm interested in that paragraph. There's not a lot I want to take away from it. It doesn't really tell me a great deal or give me anything particularly nice to quote from. Particularly as, the final line is full of just hyperbole, trying to kind of set and establish the tone of the article. Okay. What I'm more interested in, so as a pointer, I'm interested in more the meat of the text. So usually the first couple of paragraphs aren't always that helpful, and I know that some of you might want to shy away from some heavy reading, but you can't. You can't do that. You have to get into the meat of the article, because it's later in the article that you're going to probably find the really useful material, a good quotation or a useful statistics, something that's going to be helpful to you in terms of writing an essay. The first couple of paragraphs really usually just tend to set the scene, so I really don't want to see you quoting from there. But as the storm has cleared, moving on to the next paragraph, a new publishing landscape has emerged. What was once a fairly uniform business, identify a group of people united by some shared identity or passion, write stories for them to read and sell advertising next to the stories, has split into several different kinds. Interesting, and I can relate that back to my unit if we think about it. So, the storm has cleared, a new publishing landscape has emerged. Well, your most recent essay was about changes to production, and publishing is the process of production that magazines are interested in. So, that to me is suggesting that the industry itself has evolved and the institutions have had to adapt and change. And I'm interested in the end of the paragraph where it says split into several different kinds. So, the paragraph overall is kind of suggesting, I'm just going to highlight it here and insert and add a comment. It's suggesting that perhaps, I might relate this to diagonal expansion. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because of the bit that talks about, it used to be as simple as identify a group and write some stories for them, but it's split into like several different kinds in this landscape. Well, that kind of implies to me that it's not just about publishing stories anymore. And that makes me think then of, well, if they're not just publishing stories, what are they doing? Maybe they are providing other types of content. So this is me then, I'm reading the article, but what I'm trying to do as I read is link what's being said in the article to my knowledge of the main concepts and ideas that we've discussed and explored in the unit. So I'm going to add that annotation there. Hard news is perhaps the hardest to make profitable. It is increasingly instant, constant, and commoditized. As with oil or rice, consumers do not care where it came from. With rare exceptions, making money in news means publishing either the cheap kind that attracts a very large audience and making money from ads, or the expensive kind that is critical to a small audience and making money from subscriptions. Both are cutthroat businesses in which countries many papers are closing. So I know that we focus on magazines, but we can't forget that the magazine industry is part of the print industry. So sometimes there might be a comment or something that is said about news media that actually we might be able to relate that directly to the magazine industry as well. And I think that we can. So if we take the latter half of that paragraph, where it talks about the different models, I think that's quite interesting. It just reinforces our learning. So I'm going to insert a comment there. And let's think about that. So if we're going to try and break that down, I mean, that's quite interesting. So one model for magazines is to publish cheap. So you might think about weekly publications like Women's Own. Now, if you open up a copy of Women's Own, it's going to be filled with ads. Okay? So the magazine is quite cheap. It's published weekly, but it makes its money from ensuring that lots and lots and lots of people buy it, and therefore they will see their advertising. So they're guaranteeing their advertisers lots of people who will actually see their adverts. What we know from what we've studied and discussed is that the magazines that are actually making the most money at the moment and that are being successful is niche magazines. Magazines that target a particular group. Magazines like Wired, for example. Now, Wired both has a very high online digital presence, but it is really, really pushing its iPad version of its text. Now, it can do that in part because a lot of the people that read Wired magazine are interested in tech, so it's very likely that they will have an iPad. Second of all, you need to subscribe then. So, magazines like Wired make more money from subscription models as opposed to advertising. It doesn't mean there isn't advertising in Wired magazine, but what it means is that's not necessarily their primary mode of income. In fact, they make more money off getting people to subscribe and become regular consistent readers of the magazine, that it's about loyalty. So loyalty through subscription. So that's interesting. I don't know if I'm going to take that away as a quote, because I kind of already knew that. But what you've got there for you as a learner is an article that's been written quite recently that is kind of reaffirming kind of something we already know about the two different ways that magazines work. So some magazines are sold cheap, and they make a lot of their money through advertising. Other magazines tend to be a bit more expensive. They make more of their money by offering like price cuts on their subscription. So Wired magazine is several pounds to buy it each month, and if you subscribe for over the course of a year or a couple of years, it is very likely that you get a small discount off the price of the magazine. So I'm going to move on just a little bit further. But among magazines there is a new sense of optimism. In North America, where the recession bit deepest, more new magazines were launched than closed in 2011 for the second year in a row. So that's interesting, isn't it? Because we've talked very long and hard about the fact that the magazine industry is in trouble. But actually, what this article is saying, and it's pulled its information from the Association of Magazine Media, which is in the US, it's a organization that tracks data on the magazine industry, so it's quite a reliable source, saying that magazines in 2011 actually more new magazines were published. So for an industry that's supposed to be in trouble, it actually you would expect it not to be launching new content, but actually it is. The Association of Magazine Media reports that magazine audiences are growing faster than those for TV or newspapers, especially among the young. So it doesn't say why, but maybe there has to be some sort of appeal for magazine-based content. Yeah. Unlike newspapers, most magazines didn't have large classified ad sections to lose to the internet, and their material has a longer shelf life. Above all, says David Carey, the boss of Hearst Magazines. So we've got a quote coming now from somebody who works in the industry for an institution that publishes magazines. Big American publisher. They represent aspirations. They do a very good job of inspiring your dreams. So this quote is quite interesting. So I'm going to highlight this. So we've got a quote from somebody working within the industry, and he's saying that actually part of what helps magazines continue to be successful is that the content within them, the readers kind of look up to, and that they find it meets some of their gratifications. So I can link this to the uses and gratifications theory, which is an audience theory. And one of the arguments of the use and gratifications theory is that we look to media to kind of inspire us, to direct us. So we seek inspiration from media. Okay. And then, if we want to get really critical about that, we could say, if we want to be kind of a little bit more if we want to criticize that a little bit more, we might argue that, to some extent, media audiences could also be considered passive. Can't type as I'm doing this. Considered passive, and that they look up to magazines to set the agenda. So we've talked about this, haven't we? We've talked about the idea that perhaps magazines like Vogue, for example, that is a monthly publication, and that it comes out usually like a month in advance, and kind of tells you what's going to be fashionable. So we could argue that Vogue is kind of setting the trend, and that women who buy Vogue, it is mostly women, they look to the models that are in Vogue and the articles there to find out how they're supposed to look next month, what's going to be in fashion. And so, magazines in that sense serve a purpose. People identify closely with the magazines they read, and advertisers therefore love them. Magazines, say Paul Bernhard Callen, the chairman of Hubert Burda Media, a large German publisher, remain essential for brand building. Which is why luxury magazines are doing particularly well, as are those in emerging markets where a fast-growing middle class is coming into those advertiser sites. In Brazil, for example, the Ebro Group has made Minha Casa, a home improvement magazine, the leader of its kind in 2 years, thanks to a careful focus on new homeowners. So here, this is interesting, we've got to recognise that there is direct links between audiences and institutions. I'm going to add a comment. So what that is saying is that in countries where the middle class is growing, so by that we can say people with disposable income is increasing. This is helping the magazine industry by giving advertisers whilst those in emerging markets where a fast-growing middle class is coming into those advertisers' sites, giving advertisers a group to market to. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. You can see that there. So these things are not separate; they're connected. So we talk about, when I started the unit with you, we talked a bit about that relationship between the institution and the audience and how connected they are. So what this bit of the article is arguing is that there's a direct connection, that in fact, like luxury magazines that are quite high value, one of the reasons they're succeeding is that globally, so we can link this in perhaps also to globalization, as more and more countries their wealth grows and the middle class of that country becomes bigger, there are more people to market to. So luxury magazines that focus on fashion, home owning, high value cars, things like that. Technology, high value technology like iPads and high end Apple Mac computers and PCs, things like that. These kind of niche areas, these things that are, that cost money, we can market to those people. Those magazines in those areas are thriving because they are able to target people that have got the disposable income to put away on magazines. I'm going to skip down now and move us on a little bit. Back in the United States, the number of ad pages in magazines has dropped for 3 quarters in a row, according to the Publishers Information Bureau, but that is partly cyclical, says Neil Link, the MPA's head. Doesn't account for the growing number of ads in digital form, so more of the advertising is still moving to digital. Once digital ads would have been scant comfort. On the web, they are typically worth a small fraction of what they were in print, but tablets such as Apple's iPad could change this. So here we go. This is something we've talked about a lot, that the iPad is going to have a significant impact. So let's just add the note there. I'm going to put like a little star for myself and just remind me it's about impact. And I'm going to put that there. They've been around for only 2 years, and most magazine subscriptions on them for less than a year. I think that's something we forget. I mean, there is this almost sense at times when we talk about the iPad that it's like it's just there, but it's only a couple of years old. I know it's like it's into its 3rd version already, but that's because Apple iterates very, very quickly on improving its devices. But it's still a very, very new thing. And therefore, and then in terms of magazine subscription models on the iPad, so buying magazines like Vogue or Wired or Cosmopolitan, for example, this is still very new. So this is still breaking ground, as it were. MPA suggested measurement standards for advertising on tablets only in April, so this is something that they haven't even really been measuring yet. So we don't know exactly how good the iPad and digital editions of magazines are going to be for advertisers. Yet already, though, it's saying there are signs that advertisers are accepting higher rates on tablets than on the web, because magazines on tablets are more like magazines in print. So that's kind of interesting. So one of the issues that's been over time with web-based, like say a website and advertising on a website, it's difficult for magazine institutions to guarantee that the ads will be there, because for those of us that are quite savvy, that use web browsers like Google Chrome and Google Firefox, we can turn off ads. So you can't necessarily always guarantee that everybody who visits a website are going to see those ads. However, if you convince people to subscribe to your magazine on the iPad, you can bake the adverts in, just like in the print edition. So you're forcing people to actually look at those adverts. So
digital editions will force people, because they are closer to the original print edition, to look at ads. So I really can't spell, and I'm an English teacher. So it can be a well-designed experience, it can be engrossing, but what we're arguing here, and what the article is arguing, so far, for me, just to kind of think about this, this is the most important and valuable quote so far for me. It doesn't mean there won't be another one that I want to take away, but this links directly into the focus of our unit. So one of the main areas that we've looked at is the impact that technology is having on the industry. And we've talked a lot about the value of the iPad, and what this article is suggesting is that a digital edition of a magazine presented on a tablet, iPad, or an Android device is more effective, and that actually advertisers are selling their ads for more money. So magazines are making more money from the ads that they're managing to bake into these digital editions of the magazines than they are from their websites. So it seemed like for a while that the web was the answer, that having a fancy website was the solution that magazines were having to look towards to combat falling sales. But maybe the solution is going to be in digital editions, actual editions of the magazine, but made for a digital format, like on a tablet. But we know this is still a new area, so the article goes on and says that publishers are still experimenting with formats. Some are a little different from their print versions, while others are more interactive, perhaps too much so. Hearst Cosmopolitan launched the digital-only Cosmo for Guys, which purports to shed light on feminine psychology for baffled males. An early issue includes 3D models of sexual positions they could rotate to view from every possible angle. Who says glossy mags aren't educational? So there's a bit of humour in the article there, but I mean, while they're a bit cynical about what Cosmo for Guys is kind of doing there in terms of its content, the fact that a magazine could offer 3D modelling of a product, along with a host of other media, obviously, things that we've talked about like video and audio, it suggests that what can be offered in terms of content is a richer experience. So, baking in richer media. By richer media, I simply mean media that isn't just words. So sometimes we use the phrase rich media to mean things like they're audio visual. Baking in richer media to the text, to the magazine, I should say, would be clearer. But the wiser publishers are finding ways to rely less on advertising. They are looking to make more, not only from subscriptions, but also from other sources. Today you need 5 or 6 revenue streams to make the business really successful, says Mr. Carey. Spurred by necessity, enabled by technology, magazines innovate in ways they never dreamed of years ago. So there's something about innovation here. Yeah, that's quite important. So, we talked about how have processes changed? Processes, well, it's about innovating. Yeah, being creative. What else a magazine can do besides sell copies depends on its audience and subject matter. Many are turning themselves from mere carriers of ads into marketing service companies, giving their advertisers a range of new ways to reach readers. Travel magazine websites can track if their readers end up buying the holiday packages they write about and then take a cut. I count that as advertising, says Mr. Callan. What many people call advertising is definitely declining, but advertising in the broader sense isn't. Other commercial branchings out include a growing range of conferences or celebrity events. The licensing of magazines' names to products such as cosmetics and tie-up deals and coupon websites such as Groupon. So we can see here what we've talked about, is in this area of marketing, thinking marketing and expanding into other areas. So using networks, linking them up, tying their brand name in with a particular line of cosmetics, or using a service such as Groupon, and then giving the coupons away. So different ways of drawing in. Now that's not actually, to me, in my mind, that's not actually that innovative, because the idea of giving stuff away like freebies and things like that, or linking in with other services, actually has been happening in the magazine industry for a while. Just it's usually happened on the front of the magazine or inside. So maybe there's been like a free voucher inside, or there's been something attached to the front. Successful new magazines have been launched on the back of TV programs. Now this, is particularly huge. And here, we've got reference to our own BBC's Top Gear. It is one of the most successful magazines that is out there. So this tie-in with other media, which we recognise as a part of synergy, which is another one of our key ideas, is having a significant impact, on the selling of magazines. There are also more esoteric business models. Monocle, a global magazine for the insufferably stylish, claims that the online radio channel it launched last autumn has been profitable from the start, since normal commercial radio stations never deliver the kinds of listeners its high-end advertisers want. The Activist, an American iPad magazine that publishes one long piece of narrative journalism each month, says it makes money largely because it licenses its iPad publishing software to other people. So, what we're seeing from here in this paragraph is that magazines are having to be very creative and adapt to wholly different forms and methods of making money through engagement with readers. Okay? So the landscape has really, really changed. Quite significant. Can't spell wholly. Holy. There we go. So, what we're seeing there is, like launching of a radio channel. So we're talking about diagonal expansion. I should add that on. Let me add that on here. So, diagonal expansion into other media. Licensing its software. So there's an interest, like from a very nerdy kind of tech end of things. So we've got a magazine that has, put together a particular sort of like iPad magazine that you can buy, and then the software it uses to publish it. Because making a magazine for an iPad is not as straightforward as scan all the pages of your magazine and then you've got an iPad version. Literally, like most of them, they've had to build like an app from in which you can subscribe to the magazine. So, these companies then are selling on the software they've used, the way they've put that app together. They're able to sell on that software to other companies, so they'll use it. Okay, we've got the final paragraph, which has a subheading. So it says loyalty is lucrative. Well, we've known that, haven't we? We've talked about loyalty before, so let's just highlight that there. We know this. Loyalty is very important. Okay. The ability of magazines to inspire fierce loyalty among readers means there are also lots of small-time quirky successes. XXI, a French quarterly of long-form reportage, is profitable despite carrying no ads, not putting its text online and being sold only in bookshops. It seems to capitalise on French intellectual traditions and the concentration in Paris of voracious readers. So from that I'm kind of taking that magazines that are doing well are still niche, so niche is the way to go, and they know their readers well, and they put the content together specifically to meet their readers' needs. So in the case of this XXI, this French quarterly, well, some of you might have been to Paris, some of you might have not, but I mean, you're thinking about cosmopolitan area, people are out and about all day, they want to pick something up to read, they probably want to read something of decent quality, and so here's a magazine that is offering them that, and to their benefit, they're not doing it with ads, which for me personally, I think ads are awful. I can't stand to have to look at them, so I probably would find that quite interesting too, and be happy to pay the money for it if I don't have to look at advertisements for makeup and clothes. And In Close Contact with Nature is another print-only holdout with a circulation of 1 million after 7 years. As long as there are coffee tables, people will want things to put them on them. Now that seems glib at the end, but I quite like that quote because that comes back to something else we discussed in class briefly, and something I discussed with last year's A2 group a lot, which was the idea that people still want things in print. that one of the things that people are hanging on to in magazines is the fact that they do like the tactile thing, that you can put it down, it's there, and it's easy to pick up. Easy to put down, easy to pick up. Now, I know you want me to be kind of done with this. We're 30 minutes in. But one thing I want to say there is that, yes, this is a long process. So, you've got to get on and do your reading, and you should be doing this regularly, every single week. And this is part of your revision. So you say, like we talked about today, how do I revise? Well, this. You don't, read over stuff again. We take the notes, the key notes away from here, put them into a document, and we can use them for our revision. But we go and read more material. And it does take time, because this is an active reading process. This is not reading just for pleasure. This is reading with an actual purpose. What I need to do, though, now is I might just take a moment and just summarize the article. So the article, for me, overall, if I look back over my notes, is suggesting that actually things aren't all that bad for the magazine industry, that there are examples and ways that the magazine industry is adapting to what was seen as a big threat, which was the internet. One of the ways that they've done that is that they've expanded into other media, and we've looked at that. They've expanded into digital formats, Wired magazine, and so on, but they've also expanded into wholly different areas. So into radio, they've expanded into technology in terms of making apps and sharing that material, but some haven't. So at the very end of the article, it talked about how some are just focusing very much on niche readers and meeting those readers' needs. So we can see that as a trend, niche magazines and targeting a small group of people continues to be an effective way for magazines to continue to be successful. One of the other things that I picked up from the article, and I think was a really, really important point, came partway through, was that in terms of the way they're using those technologies, it's about the baking in of richer media, and that the digital formats that they're using offer innovative and creative ways of providing content for their consumers. And as we know from our understanding of the unit, that is what consumers want. Convergence is exceptionally important, and that audiences have come to expect a variety of media in one space on their mobile device, and that through digital editions, through launching magazines like Cosmo for Guys or Wired's iPad version, they are able to offer that experience. So that came out as being quite important to me from the article. So diagonal expansion, expanding into different areas to target specific groups and audiences, a concentration on niche audiences, on small groups, and making the most of mobile digital formats, particularly the iPad and what that offers in terms of baking advertising in and guaranteeing advertisers views of their ads from their readers. And with that, I'm going to finish there. I hope that you find that helpful. So your homework this week is to go away and find 2 or 3 articles that you can analyse. I will not accept this article as one because I've done it for you. So you can certainly take the notes away from this, but I won't accept it as one of your homework pieces. You've got to go and find something else. But 3 pieces, and I want to see them annotated. I want to see your notes. I want you to summarise the article, and I want to hear you talk about it and show me that you know something about the unit, other than what we've kind of covered in class or from your original case study. You've got to broaden your knowledge. Your knowledge has got to widen and grow if you're going to go into that exam and be successful.